It's a pleasure to introduce Ashley Bruckbauer, who will be speaking today. She is a PhD candidate in art history, working on a dissertation called Dangerous Liaisons, Picturing Ambassadors and Embassies in 18th-Century French Art. She is currently a teaching fellow at the Ackland Art Museum and the Department of Art History at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And her work has already been recognized with a travel grant and a paper prize by the historians of 18th century art and architecture. And today she will be speaking about ambassadors, missionaries, and converts, picturing religious conversion in images of the 1686 Siamese embassy to Versailles.
Not one for a short title. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Between 1680 and 1688, a total of 6 diplomatic embassies were dispatched between King Narai of Siam and King Louis XIV of France. These diplomatic exchanges were the first between the two kingdoms, and this paper focuses specifically on the 1686 Siamese embassy to Versailles, the most celebrated and well-documented of the delegations. In specific, I examined the significant body of visual and material culture created around this momentous occasion, including objects and images like those seen here that represent the Siamese ambassadors and their official reception by Louis XIV. I argue that these works of art present the 1686 diplomatic ceremony as a religious and military triumph, casting the Siamese ambassadors as both Christian converts and defeated infidels. While such blending of fantasy and reality might seem typical of the absolutist era of Louis XIV, I contend that it also reveals early modern diplomatic exchanges as anxious occasions with as much potential to challenge as to affirm French power, foreign subservience, and the boundaries between cultural and even religious identities. The purpose of the 1686 embassy was to ratify commercial treaties negotiated the previous year by Siamese officials and members of the 1685 French embassy to Siam. Among the outgoing delegation were 3 Siamese ambassadors and their extensive entourage, as well as 2 French missionaries, Guy Tachard of the Society of Jesus and Artist de Lyon of the Paris Foreign Mission Society, or the MEX. Both of these served as interpreters. The inclusion of these religious figures among the members of a diplomatic embassy between France and Siam is unsurprising, given that some of the earliest contacts between the French and the Siamese were made by Catholic missions in Southeast Asia. The Paris Foreign Mission Society, for example, had been established in the Siamese capital of Ayutthaya since 1664, and Lyon had been living in the kingdom for at least 5 years before the embassy. French missionaries were just one of many foreign constituencies that made up King Narai's cosmopolitan kingdom, which included merchants, soldiers, and court officials from across both Europe and Asia. In fact, Narai's desire to reduce the power of Portuguese and Dutch traders in the region is what prompted Siamese diplomatic relations with France in 1680. The 1686 embassy captured the imagination of the French populace to a much greater extent than the 2 earlier diplomatic missions between France and Siam in 1684 and 1685. And the outpouring of textual and visual representations of the embassy fueled the public enthusiasm for this particular delegation. The Mercure Galant, for example, published 4 special editions detailing the latest news and movements of the Siamese ambassadors during their 10-month stay in France. Likewise, artists captured the likeness of the exotic ambassadors and depicted their reception at court in numerous widely circulated prints, such as almanac broadsides, single-sheet engravings, and illustrated books, as well as in paintings, medals, and decorative objects. France's keen interest in the 1686 Siamese embassy and its signifying power can be seen in one of at least 8 different frontispieces for the 1687 almanac that depict the diplomatic event. This broadside, titled Royal Audiences with Foreign Ministers at Versailles, pictures various foreign ambassadors who visited the French court in 1686. While the image includes representatives from at least 9 kingdoms, duchies, and cantons, including Venice, Mantua, Switzerland, and the Holy See, it specifically highlights the three Siamese ambassadors extraordinary. These three figures occupy the majority of the left midground of the composition, where they are shown kneeling in front of and offering a letter and presents to Louis XIV. The other diplomats, by contrast, are relegated to the crowded background of the image. The decision to make the Siamese ambassadors the most prominent of the foreign visitors may well have been due to their novelty as peoples from the most geographically distant and seemingly exotic of the lands represented. Additional elements in the work give their centrality in the image further meaning, however. The subject of this print is not only diplomatic envoys to France, but also Louis XIV's recent military and religious triumphs and conflicts with Algeria, the Netherlands, and Spain. The image casts Louis XIV as a powerful and benevolent monarch, dedicated to both peace and religion. While he wears the costume of a Roman emperor and is flanked on the left by a Roman warrior, the king turns towards the allegory of peace, who sits on his other side. Below the king and the Siamese ambassadors are the allegories of time and religion. Time, on the left, is in the process of recording the many glorious accomplishments of the king, including bringing peace to the Algerians and returning prayer to the Spanish. Religion, on the right, holds open a book that reads, quote, "Under the care of religion, the churches are restored." And two closed books beneath this one are labeled, quote, "For the new converts." Directly beneath these two allegories are two roundels, one containing a scene of the installation of Louis XIV's monument in the Place des Victoires, and the other of the so-called young heroes who aided in the king's victories. These military and religious accomplishments are presented as eliciting the adoration of the Siamese ambassadors, who prostrate low before Louis XIV. The first ambassador, Cossapin, holds out a letter that reads, quote, "To the most majestic monarch who believes in Jesus, the elite and the arbiter of all Christian nations, the Emperor of France, the Lord of majesty, honor, and glory." This show of deference on the part of the Siamese seems to suggest not only their approval of Louis XIV's expansion of territory, trade, and Catholicism in Europe, but also their desire for his involvement in Siam. The allusions seen in this print to war and religion, as well as to the outcomes of victory and conversion, run throughout the expansive body of imagery related to the 1686 Siamese embassy. Many of the representations of the diplomatic visit suggest both the religious tolerance and the potential conversion of the Siamese. In particular, the presence of French missionaries in numerous images of the Siamese delegation signals the foreign figures as ripe for conversion. Artist de Lyon, for example, appears prominently in several of the almanac prints portraying Louis XIV's reception at the embassy, such as this 1687 print by Nicolas Larmassin. Though he was a member of the Paris Foreign Mission Society, Lyon grew up in one of the most prominent diplomatic families in France, with his father Hugues de Lyon serving as Louis XIV's Secretary of State from 1663 to 1671. Despite his role as a missionary, Lyon also acted as an unofficial diplomatic representative for both Narai and Louis XIV, and he traveled alongside the 1686 Siamese Embassy to Versailles and the 1687 French Embassy to Siam. In addition, the French missionary played a key part in convincing Louis XIV and the French court of Siamese religiosity. Lyon's dual role as both missionary and diplomat is clearly communicated in Larmassin's image. The missionary wears his clerical attire, but is separated from the French audience, and instead is positioned alongside the Siamese embassy. Here, he stands immediately adjacent to the first Siamese ambassador, Cossapin, their bodies overlapping, and the three objects they present forming a vertical line. While Cossapin offers a filigree goblet and a rolled scroll, likely his letter of credentials, Lyon holds out a letter that reads, quote, "Parang given to the king by the first ambassador of Siam, explained in French by Monsieur Abbé de Lyon." The position of Lyon's letter, directly in front of Cossapin's face, underlines his words as an exact translation of the Siamese ambassador's sentiments. These compositional choices suggest that Lyon acts as a fourth Siamese ambassador, blending the occupational categories of missionary and diplomat, as well as the cultural categories of French and Siamese. In addition, Lyon's translation of text from Siamese to French mirrors his conversion of souls from infidel to Christian, one of the central goals of France's exchanges with foreign lands. A painting by Jacques Vigoureux du Plessis in the Abbé de Chailly further underlines the promise of the Siamese ambassadors as ready converts. This work shows the three ambassadors in Lyon looking out over a balcony. A mille-fleur tapestry covers the balcony railing, and the corner of an architectural structure with a classical balustrade, archway, and pilasters appears behind the figures, creating the illusion of an interval balcony space. The paintings focus on non-European ambassadors, and its construction of a trompe-l'oeil architectural environment recalls both the Escalier des Ambassadeurs, completed in 1679 at Versailles, and the Sala Regia frescoes in the Palazzo di Quirinale in Rome. The inclusion of Lyon, however, ties it especially closely to the latter, which decorated the reception hall of the Papal Palace. Completed in 1616, the Sala Regia frescoes, as argued by Maya Fujikawa and Alfred Mansour, provide a vision of global conversion by depicting members of numerous non-European embassies that traveled to Rome during the papacy of Pope Paul V. As in Duplessis' painting, each embassy is shown looking out over the ledge of a balcony. One of the 8 balconies represented holds members of the 1615 Japanese embassy to Rome, which was led by the ambassador Hasekura Tsunenaga and the Franciscan friar Louis Sotello. Like Lyon and Duplessis' painting, Sotello is shown alongside the Japanese, but is clearly identifiable by his dress and physiognomy. Rather than the black robes, clerical collar, and crucifix worn by Lyon, however, he dons the traditional long brown robes and hooded cloak associated with the Franciscan order. In addition, the Japanese ambassador's colorful kimono with vegetal patterns and images of deer mirrors the bright and densely decorated robes and hats of the Siamese ambassadors. Both the Sala Regia image of the Japanese embassy and Duplessis' painting of the Siamese embassy highlight the close relationships between non-European ambassadors and Catholic missionaries, a connection that European rulers hoped would result in both diplomatic advantage and religious conversion. In fact, Hasekura and several other members of the Japanese delegation were baptized during the embassy to Europe, and Lyon instructed and baptized 12 members of the 1686 Siamese embassy during their stay in France. Narratives like Hasekura's of non-Europeans, particularly ambassadors, converting to Christianity would have been familiar and fresh in the minds of members of the French court. The printed portrait by L'Armessin on the left, for example, shows Mateo Lopez, the Christian ambassador from the African kingdom of Arda, who visited the court in 1670. Likewise, many French courtiers may have been present in 1684, when the Jesuit missionary Philippe Couplay brought the Chinese Christian Michel Shenfuzong to France. These known instances of conversion, along with assurances of King Narai's interest in Christianity, convinced French audiences that it was only a matter of time before a mass conversion of the Siamese population took place. I argue that this expectation not only influenced how the Siamese ambassadors were represented in French texts and images, but also affected how French audiences would have read representations such as L'Armessin's and Duplessis that picture missionary figures alongside the 1686 embassy. An elaborately carved ivory box that portrays Louis XIV's audience with the Siamese ambassadors on its lid makes a more direct comparison between the Siamese and Christian converts from outside Europe. The royal reception scene, taken from Sebastian Leclerc's Design for a Medal, shows the 3 Siamese ambassadors kneeling before an enthroned Louis XIV in the Hall of Mirrors. As 2 of the ambassadors prostrate with their hands clasped, a 3rd ambassador bows and presents a gift. Louis XIV looks down on the foreign visitors from his high perch, surrounded by an elaborate tapestry, carved cherubs, and other splendid objects. While Artist de Lyon is not included in the scene, religious conversion is suggested in the imagery that runs around the body of the object. The side of the cylindrical box contains 4 vignettes framed by strands of garlands and separated by alternating organic and grotesque designs. 2 of these vignettes include profile portraits of African figures, who are shown with feathered headdresses, cowrie shell necklaces, and partially exposed bodies. Both of these figures are derived from engravings by Nicolas Larmassin that appear in the 1688 book containing over 200 portrait portraits of French kings and queens, as well as of important state officials, members of the clergy, and foreign monarchs. The engravings accompanying text reveal these figures as representatives of the West African kingdoms of Guinea and Congo. The rulers of the latter converted to Christianity in the late 15th century after the arrival of Portuguese explorers and Roman Catholic priests, and Catholicism remained the popular religion in the region. In fact, the scene adjacent to that of the Japanese embassy in the Salon fresco depicts the Christian ambassador from Congo, Emmanuel Novunda, flanked by 2 Europeans. That's the one on the left. The 2 other vignettes on the body of the box show European figures wearing buttoned coats and brimmed hats, while smoking and holding pots and pieces of cloth. These details suggest that the figures were likely intended to represent Dutch traders, who had previously been a major force in West Africa and who remained France's largest competitors in trade relations with Siam. By juxtaposing a scene of the 1686 Siamese embassy with images of African Christians and Dutch merchants, this object suggests that the religious conversion of the Siamese would be a key step in both establishing French commercial ties with the region and in driving out the Protestant Dutch. Moreover, the object's ivory material, which was imported from both Africa and Asia, previews the type of treasures that ties with Siam would bring to France. In addition to connecting the Siamese ambassadors to non-European Christian converts, images of the 1686 embassy also aligned the diplomats with defeated Muslims. Returning to Larmassin's 1687 almanac print, a decorative cartouche that contains a raging battle scene and is flanked by 2 turbaned figures appears below the depiction of Louis XIV receiving the Siamese ambassadors. A small box of text beneath the battle labels it as, quote, "The city of Buda in Hungary, taken by assault on September 2nd, 1686 by the army of Emperor Leopold Ignatius I." By juxtaposing the embassy from Siam with this military triumph and the Siamese ambassadors with defeated Muslims, this image connects diplomatic exchanges to both the military defeat and religious conversion of non-Christians. Similarly, another 1687 almanac broadside of the reception also contains imagery of conquered Muslims. A complex network of 7 discrete scenes, each framed by twisting scrolls of vegetation, is situated immediately beneath prostrating members of the Siamese embassy. The central cartouche encircled by a laurel wreath displays an aerial map of the city of Buda, and 10 roundels evenly spaced around the frame each show decisive battles that led to the final victory there. Crowning this central scene is the floating head of a Turk, identifiable by his mustache and striped turban, the pattern of which echoes that of the nearest prostrating Siamese figure. A scroll that runs along the top of the cartouche over the head of the turban figure reads, quote, "The triumphs of the Church under the reign of Louis the Great and the conquest by Christians of infidels in 1686, including imperial conquests in Hungary and Venetian conquests in Moray." On either side of this central cartouche are 6 smaller scenes of events advancing the Catholic faith, including the establishment of Catholic missions in the Indies, the creation of the chivalric order of the Holy Spirit, and the defeat of Protestants in Savoy. Among these, in the upper left, is King Narai's reception of the 1685 French embassy to Siam, which is positioned alongside these various religious triumphs, situating this diplomatic event within a larger category of victories by European Catholics. A third almanac print from 1687 that focuses on the conquest of Buda further intimates a connection between Leopold's defeat of the Ottomans and Louis XIV's reception of the Siamese. This print is divided into 2 discrete scenes, one on the battlefield during the siege of the city, and the other at the court of Vienna when the defeated Turkish officers were presented to the Holy Roman Emperor. The second visually echoes depictions of diplomatic reception, such as the many images of Louis XIV's audience with the 1686 Siamese embassy. And in fact, this event is shown in the small roundel just above the head of Leopold I. Both Leopold and Louis appear on the left, seated on elevated platforms and surrounded by high-ranking members of their courts. Likewise, the 2 sets of foreigners enter and approach the thrones from the right, and onlookers watched these meetings between European rulers and foreign officials from the backs and sides of the rooms. Similar to the Siamese ambassadors, the Ottoman figures are clearly identifiable not only by their placement in the composition, but also by their distinctive dress, including patterned robes and turbans. In addition, two of the figures bow with their hands chained behind their backs, while a third prostrates low on his knees with his head almost touching the floor, recalling many representations of the Siamese ambassadors before the throne of Louis XIV. Presenting the 1686 Siamese embassy as a religious triumph on par with the siege of Buda would have been particularly useful for Louis XIV during this period, when he was highly criticized for his close relationship with the Islamic Ottoman Empire. In addition, given that Emperor Leopold and the Triple Alliance, which did not include France, led in the taking of Buda, the Siamese embassy also provided the French king with a much-needed example of France's contribution to the advancement of Catholic interests. Comparing the Siamese embassy to military actions against Muslims and Protestants also highlighted that the French king had no qualms with using force to further his interests in Siam. In fact, in 1687, Louis sent his own embassy to Siam, which included French diplomats and missionaries, as well as hundreds of French soldiers and 5 French warships. Furthermore, he instructed General Defarge, who led the military component of the mission, to establish troops in the ports of Mergui and Bangkok, and if necessary, to take these locations by force. A suggestion of Louis XIV's willingness to use force in Siam appears in an additional almanac print from 1687. In the foreground, 3 Roman soldiers pillaged the gifts brought by the Siamese ambassadors. And in the background, behind Lyon, a throng of men gather carrying pikes. The prints, paintings, and decorative objects depicting the 1686 Siamese embassy to Versailles perform an extraordinary amount of cultural work. Though these works of art suggest the political, religious, and military power of the French monarchy, I argue that their heterogeneity also signals anxiety and ambivalence. They position French missionaries as diplomats for both Louis XIV and Marais, the Siamese ambassadors as both converts and infidels, and Louis XIV as dedicated to both war and peace. They also compare the Siamese ambassadors alternatively and even simultaneously to converted diplomats from Japan, Christian princes from Congo, conquered Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, and defeated Protestants in Savoy. Such contradiction and ambiguity is common of diplomatic imagery of the period, which often redefines the cultural and religious identities of diplomatic actors as fluid and negotiable, rather than fixed and determined. Furthermore, the complexity and instability of these works of art echoes the complexities and instabilities of early modern diplomatic exchanges, which presented as much of an occasion for challenging as for asserting French power and foreign subservience. In fact, despite the seeming success of the 1685 and 1686 embassies, the Siamese Revolution in the 1687 French embassy to Siam would be a diplomatic failure. And following the Siamese Revolution in 1688, the two kingdoms would not again exchange ambassadors for over 150 years. Thank you.